I'm here with Allison Hartson, who is a progressive Democrat running in conjunction with brand new Congress and Justice Democrats, and she is challenging one of the most corrupt conservative Democrats in the United States Senate, Dianne Feinstein. So, Allison, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thanks for having me here, Mike.
So I wanted to ask you, because your background is incredibly interesting to me. So you were actually a teacher, and you decided to leave your career as a teacher to work for Wolf-PAC, which is an organization, for those who don't know, that aims to secure a constitutional amendment to get money out of politics. So my question to you is, even though money in politics is an issue that is really important to a lot of progressives like myself, it's clearly really important to you, perhaps more so than other people, because you left your career for it. So can you explain why this issue is so huge?
Because it is the foundation, the root cause of every single issue that we care about. And I came to that conclusion as a teacher and as a member of the working class. Whether we are looking or fighting for a green economy to replace our military economy, or if we are looking to get Medicare for all, living wage tied to inflation, rehabilitation over retribution for our criminal justice system, the list goes on and on. All of it comes back to the corrupting influence of money in our political system. For me, it was really all of those things, because I saw how every single one of those issues affected my students and affected their families. So I taught in a low-income district that serves predominantly first and second generation students from Mexico. I taught English, and then I also designed and taught an intervention program for students who were at risk of not graduating high school. And my philosophy going into being a teacher and choosing to work in a low income neighborhood was that the actual root cause of everything in the world, in our country, is education. The lack of equal opportunity for an equal education, essentially. And so I thought, if I could help to reform our educational system throughout the country, that's how we would be able to change the world. And after teaching for 10 years, what I realized was that there's an even deeper, more systemic root cause than education. And again, it's this corruption. And so for me, my entire life has been about how do you solve problems, being a problem solver, really. And you can't solve problems without taking the time to identify the root cause, whatever it is. And that goes for our healthcare system, that goes for our criminal justice system, and it also goes for this as well, for our entire government. What is really preventing our government from doing its job and representing everyday Americans. And once I identified that for myself and had this epiphany that I'm beating my head against a brick wall as a teacher, all of us educators are, it was a really tough decision for me to decide to leave my career as an educator, because that's really my heart. That's where my passion is. But we have to do this. There are so many people around the country right now who are making sacrifices with a career choice that we once had, now moving into politics, because we realize how urgent these issues are. And that's why I'm now running for U.S. Senate against Dianne Feinstein, because she is the epitome of what's wrong right now with our government.
Yeah, I actually wanted to get to some of her donors. So there's a long, long list, so I can't get to all of them, but some of the most prominent ones include Time Warner, Comcast, AT&T, Wells Fargo, Morgan Stanley, Northrop Grumman, which is a defense contractor. So with all of her multinational corporation donors and all of her billionaire donors, you have somehow managed, without taking corporate money, to actually outraise Dianne Feinstein for a couple of months. Can you explain how you did that? Because I know that you're not taking corporate PAC money. You're raising your money with individual small donors. How the hell did you pull this off? And what was the response in California after that happened?
The response was pretty significant. And what I've done is I've outraised her and the other corporate candidate combined in small dollar donations. That's huge.
Yeah.
And I've continued to do so. So that came out after the final quarter of 2017. And then the last FEC report just came out as well. And I am dominating the entire field. Every single person running in this race I have raised more money in small dollar donations as a percentage than anybody else. My percentage is 72% small dollar donors. That's $200 or less. And Dianne Feinstein is at, let me find this here to make sure that I'm right on this. Her small dollars are at 5%.
Wow.
And, yeah. And the other corporate candidate in this race, running as a quote unquote progressive, small dollar donations is at under 8%. And again, mine's at 72. So the way that I did that was essentially already having experience in politics. Prior to this, with Wolf-PAC, I was a national director of a political organization working to get big money out of politics, working to end this corruption and strike right at the root of what is happening in our country and around the world, quite frankly. So I already have quite a connection throughout the state of California. California is the first state where I led the charge to get our Wolf-PAC measure passed through the state legislature. I went on to do the same thing in New Jersey, Illinois, et cetera, organizing tens of thousands of volunteers throughout the country, working with legislators in red states, blue states, purple states, et cetera. And so that network has certainly helped. I already have that reputation. And then it has also helped as well to, be working with TYT. Cenk Uygur is the founder and host of TYT, as you know, of course, and he is my political advisor. He's one of them. And so through all of those aspects combined, we have a really, really strong team for my campaign. And, I've always said that whenever we are voting for a candidate, we're not voting for that one person. We're voting for their cabinet. We're voting for their team. And I have a really strong team of people with my campaign who understand how systemic these issues are. And people see that. People know this. I think people are donating because of my experience working in politics and working on this issue. And then, as successful as my campaign has continued to be, success begets success.
And one thing that is really puzzling to me about this situation is because, this is really a David and Goliath scenario here. You're going up against Dianne Feinstein. Her net worth, just excluding the multinational corporations who are contributing to her campaign, she's worth $70 million. Her husband is a billionaire. So they have all the power and influence in the world. And you managed to eclipse her in terms of donations. But even with that being said, even though that clearly by American political standards, that should theoretically make you the favorite, there's basically virtually no coverage of your campaign whatsoever. Anytime I see articles referencing her primary challenge, it's with Kevin De Leon as the progressive. No mention of you, no mention of another progressive, David Hildebrand. And you were even left off of polls. So that way it seems as though you don't even exist. So why do you think this is happening? I know that that's kind of a really complex issue, but it seems as though there's almost like this, I don't want to use the word conspiracy, but it seems like the forces that be, within the Democratic Party establishment are trying to pretend like you don't exist. So why is that the case? How can they not pay attention to you if you really are raising this much money? And that's pretty much the only way that we measure success in America for campaigns.
It's a feedback loop think tank bubble that exists in the establishment. When we talk about the establishment, it's not just legislators, it's not just lobbyists, it's not just corporations, it's also our media. And it's people who are trying to rise up in media as well. People want connections. They want to themselves, they have their career to look out for. And so they're thinking about, how do I make sure that I'm a credible person? They want to continue to rub elbows and get that next promotion. Combine that with being spread thin, with being really extremely busy, with having all of these races to cover, with having all of these candidates to cover. It's so on one hand, really trying to empathize with these journalists. I understand how difficult it can be to make sure they're covering me on top of all of the other races in California that are pretty contentious. But at the same time, I find it inexcusable, because I do think it's their responsibility, if they're going to be writing an article or doing a report on a particular race, that they at least take 20 minutes to do research on all of the candidates and see who else they should be including in their coverage, at least to just mention. So I experienced this with Wolf-PAC. The kind of propaganda that I saw around those who were fighting us at Wolf-PAC, and it wasn't just Republicans, it was actually more Democrats than Republicans, was quite an experience. And I saw how it, and I experienced it personally, just how fast it works, where really credible people in the media are working so fast to pump out stories that they trust another credible person in the media whose article they read, who trust another credible person's news report that they saw on TV. And it happens in a blink of an eye. And before you know it, the misinformation is out, and people don't know what to believe, or they automatically believe what they read or what they hear. It's very problematic. And so it's naturally going to happen in races like this, on top of the fact that we know the establishment doesn't want us to actually be in office. They don't want us to be in DC. They don't want us to be in the state legislatures. And they've actually made it quite clear. I think it was recently, was it Bill Clinton who just recently said, make sure you keep the Bernie-crats out? We've seen what the DNC has done to remove the Bernie-crats from having a say. And so, you know, all of those things combined, like you said, it's complicated, but it is something we need to be talking about. That said, there has been some progress in that regard with my campaign, which is exciting. The LA Times has covered me, not as much as they should, of course. San Francisco Chronicle, to their credit, they did cover me when enough of people really reached out to them and said, hey, please make sure you cover this person and do your job. There's been a few others that are starting to pick up and pay attention, as we're starting to see right now. So it's working. It's just taking a lot of work on our part. We have to be super creative with money, because even though I've outraised both of them, I still have a lot less money than they do. So Dianne Feinstein has $15 million right now in the coffers for this race alone. 5 of it she gave to of her own money to the campaign. Wow. And the average U.S. Senate race costs $10 million. I have less than 400,000. And what I've done with that money, well, it shows you that I've run a nonprofit. So I know, and it also shows you that I really grew up from the working class. I know how to stretch a dollar. So we've been extremely successful in the staff that we've been able to hire that works then to support the over nearly 1,800 volunteers that we now have to help us. And that's to combat. It's super massive. And so, I mean, you talk about grassroots and showing that it can work. You know, it's a lot of work, but I think it's also a lot of work probably to have a campaign with a lot of money. It's just you're spending your time and all of that work having expensive dinners with people, having expensive drinks with people. And instead, what I'm doing is having drinks and dinner at low budget restaurants with my, you know, everyday volunteers and constituents, where we just kind of meet up at a coffee shop or we meet up at a brewery and say, okay, hey, what are we going to do to come together and make this happen? And through that and some creative means using social media and not overlooking the youth vote, the millennial vote, we are seeing some pretty good momentum right now.
That's really great to hear. I did want to ask you about the recent losses of progressive candidates in Ohio. We had Dennis Kucinich. He lost his gubernatorial bid. And we had Paula Jean Swearengin in West Virginia lose. So when I covered that, I saw a lot of demoralized people, a lot of the comments saying, man, this sucks. It feels like we're never going to win. How do you basically reinvigorate your staff and, on a broader scale, the progressive movement, who feels like taking on the establishment is impossible? So, I mean, how do you respond individually to that? And what do you have to say to people who feel like it's a lost cause, you know, across the country?
I think all we have to do is look at history and realize that it's actually a win. I really don't see them as losses. You have technical wins and technical losses, who actually got in the seat. But then there's the progress that we make. Look, how many times did Bernie Sanders lose when he ran for office? And then he kept going. He never gave up. And look at where he is today. Imagine if he had given up after losing the first time, after losing the second time. There are a number of people throughout history who had more losses than they had wins. But it was finally the breakthrough that they had that became a turning point in history for the rest of us. We have to keep in mind that progress is not always necessarily tangible, but to keep up that hope. And it doesn't just have to be hope. We can look at these historical figures, but also anybody in politics can explain how that works as well. So, for example, take legislation. The average piece of legislation takes 3 times or 3 terms for it to actually pass. And that's because it takes time for you to warm up the legislators, warm up the public to learning about it, to becoming knowledgeable about it, to fighting back against their original fears for change. This is all like psychology, right? And so the work that it also takes to move a piece of legislation through committee after committee, and the number of people who are going to fight you for political reasons, let alone the policy reasons. And you keep coming back. There are so many stories of legislators working for 10 years to finally get their legislation passed. If we gave up after the first time, the second time, the third time, it's going to be, as far as I'm concerned, our fault what happens to this country. We can't give up. And we are obviously making progress. I do believe that the people who are now starting to denounce corporate PACs and who are now starting to talk about Medicare for all, and Dianne Feinstein just said she's, basically reversing her position, her lifelong position on legalizing marijuana, which, by the way, came 1 week after I put out a hit ad on her. I do think it's all lip service, and we've seen enough of that. But when they start to move, it shows that we are making a difference. What we have to just get better at is not ever letting up. Do not believe them when they say it. Hold their feet to the fire. And so what Paula Jean has pulled off, what Justice Democrats has pulled off in just this 1-2 years that they've been around is a blessing to this country. And it's nothing short of what I think just a gigantic success. The more people who jump on and support, donate money to Justice Democrats. They need it. They're grassroots too. Donate money to these candidates. We need it, because as much as we can push those candidates that we're in the race against, and as much as even one of the 52 of us running can win, that opens up the door for the next person.
That's great. Yeah. And you kind of touched on something about Dianne Feinstein that I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into, which is her policy positions, which I do find it hilarious that she did reverse her stance on cannabis after you put out the hit ad. That was amazing. But there's some things in here, and I wrote down some things just off the top of my head. She voted for the Patriot Act. She voted to reauthorize it twice, 2006, 2011. She voted for CAFTA. She voted for Bill Clinton's crime bill, his welfare reform bill, which gutted welfare. She voted for the Iraq War. She called the Snowden leaks an act of treason. And then just last year, she was holding a town hall, and she refused to support Medicare for all. And she used a Republican talking point to explain why she wouldn't support it, saying that she's not in favor of a government takeover, a quote, government takeover of healthcare in this country. So I wanted you to be able to kind of give my viewers a point of contrast between you and Dianne Feinstein, because you are progressive and you do support Medicare for all. Can you just kind of talk about what your policy and legislative priorities would be, and how you actually are more in line with the liberal voters of California than a conservative like Dianne Feinstein?
Yeah, you went through a really good number of them there. She's bad on all of it. She, like I was saying earlier, she is the epitome of the establishment, of the elite, of the corporate class. And she is kind of this law and order legislator from the 1970s, hard on crime, hard on the war on drugs, excuse me. And And as far as I'm concerned, I mean, it's the exact opposite for me. My top issues are Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage tied to inflation. But quite frankly, I think that by the time we get that federally, it's going to have to be higher. So I like to say that we really actually need a living wage is what is really important. And we have to make sure we tie that to inflation. College for all is a no-brainer. We had free college here in California. Other countries have it. We know it works. Same thing with Medicare for all, a single payer system. I am absolutely 100% against the Patriot Act and warrantless spying. I'm very concerned about the monopolization of these, corporations and corporate mergers. And, she voted to overturn Glass-Steagall. And she has voted for the Bush tax cuts, which is, essentially giving corporations loopholes to not have to pay their taxes as well as the wealthy.
And herself.
And herself. That's right. She's giving herself a tax break, and her husband, her billionaire husband. And so the list goes on and on with her. It's pretty obvious that she just, she's had 25 years in Congress, in the Senate. She had another 25 years as mayor of San Francisco. So she's been a representative for half a century, and she hasn't progressed with the times. And the fact that just a little over a year ago, she's repeating a Republican talking point that it's going to be a government takeover of healthcare. She knows better. She is like the epitome of a politician that says what she needs to, when she needs to manipulate the voters. So she says that to move people away from Medicare for all. Now she's running for office and she stays away from that. And she starts talking about how all of a sudden she's going to support states' rights and she's going to support marijuana. She didn't do anything to stand up for DACA prior to January. And then all of a sudden she flipped on that and did it in January when she saw that there was some heat in this race. She's just not an honest actor. She's an honest politician, but she's not an honest actor.
So before we go, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about a pretty big, I don't know if you would say benefit or something that's bad for her, that happened to Dianne Feinstein with regard to her re-election bid. So she had an establishment figure, perhaps the biggest establishment figure on the Democratic Party side, come out and endorse her, Barack Obama. So I just wanted to get your response to that, because I kind of ripped the endorsement in a video that I posted, but I want to hear what you have to say about that, because that really got under my skin.
Yeah, for me, it didn't get under my skin. I thought it was hilarious. And I actually think it's quite the compliment, because it shows that she's worried and that the establishment is worried about her seat. And I have this theory. I was just talking to Jenk about this on TYT on a couple nights ago. And it dawned on me during our conversation that it's very possible what the establishment is doing right now is circling the wagons. Are you there? You're starting to freeze for me.
Yes, I am here.
Me? Okay, good. That they are definitely circling the wagons to protect their own. And after the DCCC attacked a couple of the Justice Democrats and it backfired, that they're probably now doing the opposite and going for the positive tactic.
That makes
and
sense.
Saying like, yeah, let's take somebody who liberals think is progressive and have him endorse Feinstein. And, it's smoke and mirrors, of course. We progressives who have been following politics, we know that Barack Obama is not a progressive. And if you go to my Twitter handle, it's Hartson for CA, FOR is spelled out. Hartson for CA is my handle for everything. You can actually find my a tweet I just put out yesterday about this video where I'm talking about this. But he's not a progressive. He extended essentially the Bush wars and multiplied them. The number of drone strikes that he did. He exported essentially more undocumented citizens, as I like to refer to them, from our country than any other. And I mean, the list goes on about Did he do anything about the Bush tax cuts? No, he basically kept them. So he's not progressive. And look, there are some things that we can point to that Barack Obama did a good job on. And I will give credit where credit is due 100%. But for him to come out and endorse Dianne Feinstein, for me, all it does is actually prove what many of us have been saying for years, that he is no progressive. He's a conservative.
Right. That's exactly it. So yeah, I kind of thought that you would say something along those lines, because to me, it irritated me. But at the same time, it did communicate to me that they're terrified. She's afraid that her career is now in jeopardy. So, I mean, whenever you see these types of really high profile endorsements, when they're actually pretty rare, it really sends a big message that the establishment is terrified. So that's all thanks to the great campaign you're running. So before you go, can you tell us where we can help out your campaign and contribute and potentially even canvas for you at?
Yeah. Go to my website, AllisonHartson.com. It's super simple, AllisonHartson.com. And on there, you can find out how to volunteer, how to donate. We have a number of ways that you can volunteer, whether you can canvas or phone bank or help with social media or graphic design. So many people are offering a number of different services, making videos for us, etc. And so just do that. Go to my handles as well, whether you're on Twitter or Facebook, Instagram. We are trying to make ourselves as available as possible.
And the primary is June 5th, correct?
The primary is June 5th, but mail-in ballots are starting right now. And so that's really important, because in California, our mail-in ballots count for, this is a huge margin, but anywhere from 30 to 70%.
Wow. Depending
on the election, but it's huge. And so we need to be getting out the vote right now because of those mail-in ballots. So those end May 21st. Last day to register to vote is May 29th, and actual election day is on June 5th.
Okay, well, thanks so much for coming on the show. Good luck.
I appreciate it. Thanks for all you do.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.